Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop preview for tonight's matchup out there between the Seahawks and the Bears. Gonna make sure you're ready with first off there with your showdown lineups and what I'm doing over there in my DraftKings DFS lineups. We'll talk correlation, some injuries out there before lock, go through our projections, make sure you're ready to go out there and try and take down a GPP or two. And then afterwards is where we're gonna be focusing on the prop side of things. In my top underdog and prize picks props, you might want to consider adding to a few slips yourself. We're gonna focus on a 3-leg over there on the underdog side that pays well over a 6x payout that you perhaps might want to add to the portfolio yourself. So let's not waste any time at all. Let's go ahead and hop right on in with first off a look at the DraftKings DFS side. The one real piece of injury news that we have to focus on is going to be Kenneth Walker III, who has already been rolled out for the Seahawks. That, of course, is going to give a lot of extra usage to a Zach Charbonnet, but potentially even players like a Kenny McIntosh or a George Holani towards the bottom end of the board. But outside of that piece of news, not a lot that we're waiting on before this evening, so a little bit more straightforward when it comes to the injury report. But in terms of script, I think a little bit more complicated tonight. So in terms of your spread, it is a 4-point spread favoring the Seahawks, 4.5, maybe 5 points at a few spots, and they're the real team tonight that has something to play for. While it's out of their destiny, they have to go 2-0 the next 2 weeks, there is a chance that they can go out there and make it to the postseason. On the other side of things, we do have the Bears, who have already been eliminated from playoff contention. So I would argue that tonight, the Seahawks, though they are 4 or 5 point favorites, should probably be even larger favorites that we have there on paper. So obviously Vegas is assuming that Chicago's going to have some fight in them, but as we've seen for the last week or so, and particularly last weekend, you had some teams give up out there in the second half. So I don't think the Bears are going to be immune to that sort of thing tonight. So while the ownership is going to be biased out there towards Seattle, I tend to understand it. They are the favorites. They are the team actually with playoff motivations, which is why I'm going to be siding towards them in a lot of my lineups. Unfortunately, that is going to come at higher ownership. So a majority of my high dollar exposure tonight is going to be in single entries, smaller field GPPs, maybe even cash lineups, as opposed to those large field contests. And I don't want to have to go out there, beat 50 to 100,000 other entries when the game script that I want to build for tonight is going to be the most popular build that you're seeing out there in those contests. So before you go out there, you start building lineups for tonight. Heck, even before you go out there and reserve your entries, you probably want to be thinking about the kind of lineup construction that you're going with. If you're more of a believer in Chicago, heck, maybe even want to go with a 4-2 Bears lineup, that sort of thing, then you really want to be checking out some of those large field GPPs. But if you tend to agree with that more chalky game script, then you might want to consider taking the approach that I am for tonight. But let's go player by player now, give you guys an idea of how to use all these different players. And towards the top, we've got JSN at $10,200, which isn't an overly expensive, most expensive guy on the slate, but it's worth noting for JSN that this is a very pricey price tag. He's more of that PPR sort of wide receiver. He's not used to getting us 60, 70-yard touchdowns. And while this year he's given us a little bit more of that big playability, he's not the kind of wide receiver that routinely gets us 25 to 30 fantasy points. He more so lives in that 15 to 25 zone for a majority of his performances. And while I think he's a really good play for tonight, I just think he's a little bit better at the flex position than what we have over there at captain. I'd rather get to a DK Metcalf if I'm looking for a Seahawks wide receiver at captain, or potentially even one of these Bears wide receivers as the buyback in a Seahawks heavy lineup. So, I'm going to have lineups tonight that are maybe JSN, Geno, one other wide receiver or running back over there for Seattle. Maybe I mix in a kicker defense over there for the Seahawks, and running it back with just 2 players on the Bears. But what I want to point out here is that at the captain position, I'm not against using maybe a Keenan Allen, a Rome Odunze, a DJ Moore up here at $10,000 as my captain, even in a Seattle heavy lineup. So the lineup construction tonight, I think you have to treat a little bit differently. In the way that I'm playing for a lot of my lineups is Seattle to control the game, that they're playing from ahead for most of the time, that you're going to see a little bit of extra usage out there for the Seattle running backs playing from ahead, and maybe a little bit more passing from the Chicago side as they're playing from behind. Which, speaking of, you have these 2 wide receivers for Chicago as your next, second, third highest priced players. So it'd be DJ Moore and a Keenan Allen. DJ Moore, more of that big play upside. He gets a lot of screen passes thrown to him as well. But Keenan Allen, if you're looking for a buyback, so somebody in like a 4-2 Seattle lineup to go out there and get some PPR upside on the other side, Keenan Allen would be the guy that I'm looking for. As if you're looking for splash plays, 15 to 25 yard catches, just watch the end of the tape from last week's game. It was all Keenan Allen. He was pretty much getting every single target. You had Rome Odunze getting a few mixed in as well. But if you're looking for a buyback, even at 9,800, which just like JSN for a PPR wide receiver like Keenan, that is a little bit of a steep price tag, but there's not a ton of guys that are super expensive on the slate. Like even the quarterbacks, $9,600, $9,400 respectively. The cumulative outcome of all of them being relatively low priced makes it not such a big deal that they're going to cost you about $10,000. And speaking of these quarterbacks, they are jam plays for a lot of people tonight. That's not just because they're popping off the page in terms of their points per dollar projection, but also the fact that they're so cheap on this sort of slate. So just like I said with these wide receivers, you're going to have the salary that you need to go out there and build lineups. Just make sure you're doing it properly with your correlation. It probably goes without saying, but anytime you're playing one of these quarterbacks, you want to be bringing at least one player along with them, and that includes a Caleb Williams. He does have a little bit of rushing upside in almost every single case that he's going to make the optimal. He's bringing along at least one player along with them. Somebody like Geno Smith, probably at least two players in every lineup that he's getting there to the optimal, as he doesn't have as much rushing upside as a Caleb Williams. DK Metcalf at $9,200, I think is a very fair price tag for the kind of ceiling that he has. I would say a lower floor tonight, as they are expected to be playing from ahead, a little bit of spotty showers potentially heading through Seattle as well. So that could lead to a little bit more of a rushing first approach out there for the Seahawks. But at $9,200, if I'm looking for a captain play over for the Seahawks, I think DK Metcalf is one of my favorite options. Speaking of, though, the best play over there for Seattle isn't so much that he's the most talented player out there for the Seahawks, but it's all about opportunity. That'd be Zach Charbonnet at $8,400. He projects for over 2.2x points per dollar value, which is the best mark on the slate by bar none. Right, second place would be a Geno Smith here at a 2x points per dollar, but 2.2x points per dollar, getting some ownership. But between flex and captain, I've only got him at 59.2%. That's lower ownership than a Geno Smith, lower ownership than a Caleb Williams. And it's worth noting, guys, that this Chicago Bears defense has led up the second most rushing yards per game out there to opposing running backs at over 117 rushing yards per game. So a Charbonnet as that running back one, only $8,400. And by the way, he is favored to go out there and score this evening as well, is probably the guy that I'm locking into every single lineup. Heck, even if I'm playing a Chicago lineup, if I was playing in the large field GBP trying to get some leverage, you'd have to think that Charbonnet, because of his receiving upside out of the backfield, can still get there in that kind of game script too. So Charbonnet, even if you're going out there with the lower owned game script on the Bears, is probably going to be a key fixture of even those kind of lineups. A DeAndre Swift at $7,600. The one thing I will note about Swift is that the price tag is very soft for the kind of role that he has. He's the clear workhorse back out there for Chicago. He does have some receiving upside out of the backfield as well. So at about 40% combined ownership, I actually think that Swift is a little bit more live than most people would think. Obviously, they're playing from behind. They're expected to be in a negative game script, which is why he's only going to be about 40% owned, but only $7,600 for a running back one. It's just like Charbonnet. He's such a big value. At $8,400 as the running back one for Seattle, $7,600 for Swift is also way too cheap. A Rome Odunze at $7,000. This is more of a GPP sort of play. So if I'm playing in cash, like Charbonnet is a lock in cash. Heck, even a Swift is going to be close to a lock out there in a lot of cash lineups. Large field GBP, if I'm trying to get different out there with the Bear, Rome Odunze is a good player to do so with. He's only about 22% owned out there at the flex position. It does give us some downfield threat ability. He's got, a really good ability to go out there and high point the football. So he does have some red zone touchdown upside on top of that, but he's also a speedster there at $7,000. So if I'm playing in the large field GPP, I'm looking for one or two buybacks out there from the Bears. Maybe you are taking one of these premier wide receivers like a Moore or an Allen, but if you need to spend down a little bit, maybe you went a little bit higher on your guys for Seattle in terms of price tag. Rome Odunze could be a little bit of a cheaper buyback option. Both of these kickers make some sense, but I'm especially looking at Jason Myers for tonight. Obviously playing his favorites, that bodes well out there for his projection, but he's also only about 24% combined owned there between flex and captain, so very reasonable when it comes to a kicker. I'm also looking at the Seahawks defense in quite a few lineups, especially if I'm assuming that the Bears might give up a little bit if they're playing from behind. That would lead to a lot of extra points out there for Seattle. A Cole Kmet, $4,400. Not the best points per dollar value, but in the right kind of game script, especially if he gets into the end zone, could be a play at $4,400. Mostly only for large field GPPs though. As you can see, the points per dollar value is much better on other guys in this range, including the Seahawks defense. Jason Myers, 1.7x points per dollar value. Those are the guys that you're looking to in your higher dollar stuff out there for tonight. If you're looking also for a player down here that's got a solid floor, that would be a Noah Fant at $3,600. A 9-point projection is really good for a $3,600 player and over a 2.5x points per dollar value. So if I'm playing in cash, even if I'm playing in like a smaller field GPP, or maybe it's a little bit of a higher entry fee, guys like Noah Fant are the players that I prefer down low. It's not like you can't use guys like a Komet. Tyler Lockett, for example, is a slightly lower tier play. It's just that I would be using them in the right sort of contest. It's not like you have to force in super low ownership down low, but a Lockett getting to a Komet, a large field GPPs where you need that differentiation could make a whole lot of sense for this evening. A Kenny McIntosh running back 2 duties out there for Seattle tonight could be looked to in a few lineups, especially if it ends up being a route out there for Seattle. So I think if I was going to play McIntosh, I'd rather do it in like a 5-1 lineup alongside potentially using a Zach Charbonnet. So having both running backs out there for Seattle, assuming that they're playing from way ahead. You could go to Jake Bobo. He's your wide receiver 4 over there for Seattle, but he does see snaps occasionally out there. George Halani, we'll have to see if he's active for Seattle tonight. If he is, you might want to look for some extra usage from him out of the backfield. And then Tyler Stott, he is going to be your wide receiver 4 or 5 out there for Chicago. Same thing as Bobo. Like, he'll play snaps every once in a while, but far from the most reliable play. Pretty much everyone from Bobo down, these are GPP only sort of plays. Cash single entry, you'd be crazy to use any of these sort of players. And, you know, a little bit up above this is where you might have like a Lockett sneaking into a single entry. You might have a Cole Kmet sneaking into a single entry if you really got to get different with your last spot. But it's more so your Fants. It's more so your Seahawks defenses, your Jason Myers, that I'm going to be rounding off my lineups with. And now for the prop side of things, where I've got a 3-leg slip you guys might want to consider adding for yourself. So the first prop we're going to go through is this DK Metcalf under on receptions, which was minus 147 for his under on Pinnacle, is minus 135 for his under on DraftKings, and on sites like FanDuel was near that minus 140 mark. So a lot of plus EV value out there towards the under, and it makes sense when you think about this matchup. First off, Chicago, the second best team in the NFL when it comes to limiting receptions to wide receivers, ranking number 2 in the entire NFL in terms of receptions allowed per game. So they've been really good at limiting those outside players. And DK Metcalf, of course, is exactly that sort of option. A JSN who's working on the inside, more of that slot sort of wide receiver, might be able to avoid some of the elite cornerbacks, elite safeties out there for Chicago. But DK Metcalf isn't going to have that same luxury. That combined with the fact that Seattle is supposed to be playing from ahead as 4 5-point favorites, and the fact that they might have some spotty showers, rain showers, that come through the area tonight, could all make this an even better value towards the under. So the plus EV value really makes this a no-brainer at minus 145, but you add in all that extra stuff on top of it, and you could see why I'm playing that prop. Next prop we took was the over on Zach Charbonnet rushing yards. On books like Pinnacle, he's at 67.5, but it was minus 133 towards the over. So the 1 yard difference, still something that I'd go out there and mix in, especially considering that on most of the major books out there, he's at 69.5 plus yards. So that would include DraftKings, FanDuel, all those major books have him at least 69.5, and that also includes Prize Picks over here on the right. So what you'll see is he's at 69.5 right there. DK Metcalf, actually, you can't even play him at 4.5 over there in Prize Picks, so they've gone ahead of those bumps, ahead of that plus EV value, and decided to take it off the board, which is why we want to play this over here on the underdog side. So under on DK Metcalf, over on rushing yards for Zach Charbonnet. There's some correlation there within the Seattle Seahawks team if they were to be playing from ahead. Of course, right, that leads to more rushing if you're playing from ahead, and less of those outside throws to wide receivers. And then on the other side of things, I have this under on Caleb Williams passing attempts. I was struggling to really find anything from Chicago that I wanted to play, and I ended up going with this under on passing attempts, as I really think that they might give up tonight. I think that when they're playing from behind the first few quarters, you are going to see them pass quite a bit. To go over a 33.5 passing attempt line, though, you've got to be playing all 4 quarters. There's just no way to go over that sort of line and end up leaving the game early. And I think if it ends up being like a 2, God forbid, a 3 touchdown game at any point tonight where Seattle is leading, that Caleb Williams, he might not leave the game. I think there's definitely a chance that he could end up leaving in like the 3rd or 4th quarter. But even if he's in there, it might just be a bunch of DeAndre Swift. They might just say, fuck it, try and get out of there early. You've seen teams do that, including the Steelers, by the way, the last 2 weeks. And if they're a playoff team, a team that cares, is still playing for playoff positioning and has done that the last few weeks, then you damn know that the Bears, who can't even make the playoffs at this point of the year, could be willing to do the same thing. especially considering that they're trying to get the best draft pick possible out there for next year. So yeah, Caleb Williams, the under at 1.07x, he's about even money on most of the books at 33.5, and there's even a few books that have him at 32.5 passing attempts. A few of them juiced just a little bit towards the over, so I don't want to call it like a massive value down there at 32.5, but if you're giving me an extra multiplier on taking this under, you give me that game script, which could end up making them give up towards the end of the game, and that's why I'm taking this kind of slip. If that were to happen, by the way, guys like DK Metcalf, if it's that huge kind of lead, they're probably not getting a whole bunch of second half usage, and Zach Charbonnet, he might actually get limited usage-wise towards the end, but you'd hope that he'd have 70 plus yards at that point if they're playing from like 3 touchdowns ahead. So that's the idea with this sort of slip. It pays over the 6x that you'd normally get here in Underdog because of that 1.07x payout. So really solid combination there, a little bit of correlation across all 3 spots. And the reason why you'd play it there in Underdog is not only are you getting a better payout, but you can't even use the DK Metcalf line over there on the Prize Pick side. So Caleb Williams, he's at 33.5 on Prize Picks and no multiplier. So once again, just a better site to play it over there in Underdog. Make sure you do your line shopping. Make sure you're always getting the best payout available. And of course, guys, for all the different pieces of exposure that I'm entering there before lock tonight, make sure to check out the Patreon page for all of that. That's all out there for the Thursday night football preview. Hopefully you guys feel a little bit more prepared out there for this evening. First off, smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come. That will, of course, include our preview out there for the Saturday games, the main slate out there this weekend, and the rest of the content throughout the rest of the year. I'm looking forward to it. Should be a fun slate on our hands this evening. Best of luck out there with all of your exposure, and for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page, go ahead and comment down below who you've got as the top scorer out there for tonight, and their score within 2 fantasy points. So if you can get their score within 2 DraftKings points tonight, you're going to win access to my Patreon page for free. On there, of course, you guys can get all the projections that I'm doing for DFS, includes my player pool, all the script notes that I'm going for every player in the game, on top of all the prop slips that I'm taking on Underdog and Prize Picks. So for all of that, make sure to go ahead, enter the giveaway, or go ahead and join the Patreon page in the link in the description of the video. That's all I've got though, guys. Appreciate your support on their channel as per usual. Best of luck this evening, and let's go out there and get after it.